Marriage is a funny thing. One day, you're high-fiving your wife over landing the last bottle of sriracha at the store, and the next, you're staring at your ceiling at 3 a.m., wondering if she ever really liked sriracha to begin with. That's how it started for me. Small questions that didn't mean much until they suddenly did. Emily and I had been married for 7 years. She was my first real relationship, the kind where you sign joint tax returns and argue about who gets the side of the bed closest to the charger. I'm 38, working in cybersecurity, which sounds cooler than it is. It's mostly locking accounts for people who think password 123 is adequate protection. Emily, on the other hand, was a landscape architect. Creative, sharp, the kind of person who could see potential in a patch of dirt and make you believe she could turn it into Versailles. We met in line at a coffee shop. I was nursing a hangover. She was ordering a caramel macchiato with oat milk. I told her I hated caramel macchiatos. She told me I looked like someone who ordered plain black coffee to seem interesting. And just like that, we were off to the races. Fast forward to last year, and things were off. I couldn't pinpoint when it began. Maybe it was when she started coming home later, always with a rehearsed excuse, client meetings, gym classes, traffic. Or maybe it was when she stopped asking me how my day went, something she used to do even when she didn't care about the answer. But the thing that really stuck out was her phone. Emily wasn't glued to it like some people, but she'd always leave it lying around until she didn't. One day, she started keeping it face down, always within arm's reach. I joked about it once, and she laughed too hard, like I'd caught her in the middle of something. "Are you having an affair with your Duolingo app?" I teased. "See," she shot back, grinning, but her eyes didn't quite match her smile. "Gotta keep my streak alive." I brushed it off, but that night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her smirking at her phone, thumbs scrolling too fast to be reading anything meaningful. And then came the scarves. Emily hated scarves, called them useless neck blankets. Yet suddenly, she had 3. I asked her about them. She shrugged and said they were gifts from a client. I wanted to believe her, but they were monogrammed, and not with her initials. The scarf thing gnawed at me for days. Emily wasn't a liar, at least she hadn't been. But when I asked her whose initials were on them, she deflected with, "It's just a branding thing. Some design studio, I think." The answer came too quick, like she'd rehearsed it. I told myself to let it go, but you know how that goes. It's like being told not to push the red button. Suddenly, all I could see were red buttons. The scarves, the phone, the late nights, all of it. A few weeks later, the first real crack appeared. I was working from home that day, sitting at my desk in the office we shared. Emily had left for a client site visit, her usual excuse lately. My work laptop chimed with an email from our internet provider, a routine notification about data usage. I skimmed it, mostly out of procrastination, when I noticed something odd. During times when Emily was supposedly at work or the gym, our Wi-Fi was getting a significant workout. Not weird, you might say, unless you're married to someone who swears she doesn't even stream TV during the day. I checked the devices connected to our network and saw one I didn't recognize, a generic name like Samsung Galaxy. Emily didn't own a Samsung. Curiosity got the better of me. I checked the IP address, then did what any self-respecting cybersecurity analyst would do. I traced it to a cloud backup linked to an email address I didn't recognize. The name? Andrew Devlin. Now, Andrew wasn't some random name in Emily's life. I knew the guy. He was a colleague from one of her old projects, a smug bastard who once told me landscaping was just fancy gardening. I sat there, staring at my screen, the pieces starting to fit. The scarves, the phone, the Wi-Fi. I didn't confront her right away. I needed more than breadcrumbs. So like any normal husband spiraling into paranoia, I started keeping tabs. I noticed she started using the gym excuse more often. She'd leave with her mat and water bottle, come back 2 hours later, sweaty and flushed. Except one day, I realized she'd forgotten her gym bag in the kitchen, 2 hours after she'd left. That night, I casually brought it up. "How was the gym?" "Great," she said without missing a beat, towel drying her hair. "That new yoga instructor is amazing." "Which class was it again?" She frowned. "Hot yoga." "Why?" Her answer was a nail in the coffin. Emily hated hot yoga, said it was just a sauna with a side of cult vibes. I didn't press further. Instead, I waited until she fell asleep and checked her phone. Of course, it was locked. But I'm no amateur. I synced her phone to my laptop. Nothing too invasive, just enough to see some of her texts and photos. There it was, a message thread with someone saved as Andrea D. Clever, right? A woman's name. Except the messages were anything but platonic. Andrea D. Today was incredible. Thinking about that moment in the car. Emily. Me too. You always know exactly what I need. The car? I wanted to throw up, but I had to stay calm, had to think this through. When she woke up the next morning, she kissed me on the forehead, humming some cheerful tune. Like nothing was wrong. Like she hadn't just spent the night texting some guy about their little tryst. Big plans today? I asked casually. Just work stuff, she replied, grabbing her bag, the same gym bag she hadn't touched the day before. Might hit the gym later. Hot yoga again? She hesitated for a fraction of a second. Yeah, why? Just curious. I watched her leave, all smiles and sunshine. And for the first time in our 7 years together, I realized I had no idea who I was married to. The moment Emily left, I felt my stomach churn. I wasn't just angry. I was embarrassed. How had I let it get this far? I'd prided myself on being observant, on knowing her better than anyone. Yet here I was, digging through digital breadcrumbs like a jilted teenager. I knew I needed proof. Solid, undeniable proof. Something that didn't leave wiggle room for excuses like it's not what it looks like, or he's just a friend. Something that would turn the tables in my favor. The first thing I did was buy a GPS tracker. I know it sounds extreme, but desperate times, right? It was a small, discreet device, perfect for slipping into her car without raising suspicion. I planted it under her passenger seat one evening while she was in the shower, feeling equal parts spy and scumbag. The next few days were a waiting game. I didn't want to jump the gun and confront her without knowing the full story. So I kept things normal. If she was being deceitful, I could be too. Her routine stayed predictable. Morning coffee, work, gym, home. But the tracker told a different story. On the third day, she left for her usual yoga class but ended up parked outside a high-end hotel downtown. The kind of place where the valet looks you up and down to decide if you belong. My chest tightened as I watched her little to sit there for over 2 hours. When she got home later, I played it cool. I casually asked how her day had been, expecting her to rattle off some generic story about downward dog and muscle soreness. It was good, she said, not even looking up from her phone. That instructor is seriously kicking my ass. I nodded, biting back the urge to call her a liar. You must love it, huh? Always coming back sweaty and glowing. She smirked, finally looking up. What can I say? I'm dedicated. Dedicated. Right. To Andrew Devlin and his stupid monogram scarves. The next morning, I decided to take things further. I booked a half-day off work, grabbed a pair of sunglasses and a baseball cap, classic amateur disguise, and drove to the hotel she'd been frequenting. If she was meeting him there, I wanted to see it for myself. It wasn't enough to know. I needed the ugly, unvarnished truth. Sure enough, her car pulled up about 10 minutes after I arrived. I parked across the street, heart pounding as I watched her step out, wearing one of those scarves. She looked around briefly, nervous, excited, before disappearing inside. A few minutes later, Andrew Devlin strolled in behind her, a smug grin plastered across his face. I clenched the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I wanted to storm in there, flip tables, maybe punch the guy in his overly moisturized face. But I didn't. I stayed put, telling myself to play the long game. Bursting in like a lunatic wouldn't give me what I wanted, the upper hand. When Emily came home that evening, she acted like nothing was amiss. She kissed me on the cheek, humming a tune like she didn't just spend the afternoon with Andrew Scarves Devlin. I forced a smile, but inside I was already plotting. I needed something bigger, more damning. The texts and GPS tracker were good, but I wanted to make sure this would sting. So I called in a favor. My buddy Kyle, who owed me big for helping him out of an HR debacle a year ago, worked in corporate security. I gave him the barest details, saying it was a personal matter, and asked if he could run a search on Devlin. Turns out Andrew wasn't just a smug bastard. He was a married smug bastard. Perfect. The next step of my plan? Emily's phone. I waited until she fell asleep that night. then carefully took it from her nightstand. She always used her thumb to unlock it, so I gently pressed her thumb against the sensor and held my breath. It worked. I was in. Scrolling through her messages with Andrea D. was like wading through a swamp of emojis, inside jokes, and innuendos. But what stood out wasn't what was there. It was what wasn't. Gaps. Missing messages. She'd been deleting them, carefully curating the story. But she wasn't smart enough to delete everything. One message caught my eye. Tomorrow, same room as usual. Can't wait. Don't forget the wine this time. I took a screenshot and sent it to myself. The same room as usual? So this wasn't a one-time slip-up. This was a regular thing, a scheduled betrayal. I locked her phone and slid it back, barely containing my rage. But I didn't confront her. Not yet. No, this was just the beginning. If Emily thought she could play me for a fool, she was about to learn how good I was at playing dirty. By the next morning, I was more focused than I'd been in years. There's something about betrayal that sharpens your instincts. My mind was no longer clouded by questions or doubts. No, I had a plan, and it was going to be beautiful. I couldn't storm into the hotel room. I couldn't punch Andrew Devlin in his smug face, though I fantasized about it often. No, I needed revenge that left no trace, something that would hit them both where it hurt without a single blow thrown. First, I needed more dirt on Andrew. Kyle's initial favor had given me a few threads to pull. His marital status, the fact that his wife was the primary breadwinner, and, get this, he'd been caught flirting with another colleague a few years ago. Corporate swept it under the rug, but it was in Kyle's file notes. The guy had a pattern, and I was going to use it. That afternoon, while Emily was working late, I called Andrew's wife. Let's call her Rebecca. I didn't lead with the affair. No, I started cautiously. Hi, Rebecca. My name's James. I think we have a shared problem. Her tone shifted immediately. Who is this? What are you talking about? It's about Andrew, I said carefully. I think he's been less than honest with you. She went quiet, the kind of quiet that feels like an inhale before a scream. What do you mean? I gave her just enough to get the wheels turning, mentioning the hotel, the scarves, the texts. I wanted to come to you first. I lied, because I want someone to do the same for me. Rebecca didn't explode. She didn't sob. Instead, she gave a sharp, bitter laugh. You're not the first person to tell me something like this about Andrew. It was almost disappointing how calmly she handled it, but I wasn't done. I told her I'd send over the evidence I had, screenshots of texts, GPS data, photos of them entering the hotel. She thanked me, her voice cold and clipped, and hung up. I had no idea what she'd do next, but I knew one thing. Andrew's life wasn't going to be the same after this. Now it was Emily's turn. She came home that evening, as radiant as ever, like she hadn't just spent the day with another man. It made my stomach churn to look at her, but I forced myself to stay calm. Hey, she said, dropping her bag by the door. Long day. How about takeout? Sure, I said, keeping my voice casual. Let me order. You look like you could use a break. She smiled, a flicker of the woman I used to know, and went to the bathroom. While she was gone, I unlocked her phone again. I had one more message to send. I pulled up her text thread with Andrea D. and wrote, "We need to talk. Come over tomorrow morning." Then I deleted the message from her phone. Andrew wouldn't know it wasn't her who sent it, and Emily wouldn't know it ever went out. When she came back, I handed her a glass of wine. To another long day, I said, clinking glasses with her. To another long day, she echoed, blissfully unaware of what was coming. The next morning, I took the day off work and parked a few houses down the street from ours, lying in wait like a hunter. Sure enough, Andrew's car rolled up around 10 a.m. He got out, wearing a blazer like he was heading to a business meeting. The arrogance made me laugh. I didn't confront him. Not yet. I wanted him to stew for a while, to wonder what had gone wrong. I snapped a few photos of him entering the house, and then drove off, heading to my next destination. That afternoon, I mailed Emily a package. Inside was everything. Screenshots of her texts, photos of her entering the hotel, timestamps from the GPS tracker. But I didn't send it to our house. I sent it to her office. I wanted her to open it there, surrounded by her co-workers, where she'd have to plaster on a fake smile and pretend everything was fine. I wasn't done, though. Oh no, this was just the appetizer. When I got home that evening, Emily was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone, looking for all the world like nothing had happened. "Hey, how was your day?" she asked, flashing me a practice smile. I grinned back, sharp as a knife. "Oh, it's been interesting. But don't worry. Tomorrow's going to be even better." She didn't notice the edge in my voice, but she would. Soon. The next morning, Emily left for work as usual. She kissed me goodbye, a quick peck on the cheek, and smiled as if everything in the world was perfect. If I didn't know better, I would have admired her composure. But I knew the storm that was about to hit her. I waited until I knew she'd be at her desk before sending the email. It wasn't just to Emily, it was a group email, copied to her team, her boss, and HR. The subject line read, "Unprofessional conduct and breach of trust." In the email, I attached some of the evidence, just enough to show the affair without being explicit. Screenshots of texts between her and Andrew, timestamp photos of them entering the hotel, even a clip from the GPS tracker log showing how often she frequented that place during work hours. I didn't accuse her outright. I let the evidence speak for itself. My tone was neutral, professional, like a concerned whistleblower. By the time Emily got my package at her office, her coworkers were already buzzing about the email. A double whammy. I imagined her trying to act normal as she opened the envelope, only to find her own betrayal staring back at her. She called me just before lunch, her voice frantic. "What the hell is going on, James? I just got some insane email at work. Did you send this?" I played dumb. "What email? Are you okay? Don't play games with me. Someone's trying to ruin my life." "Emily," I said, my voice icy calm. Maybe whoever sent it thought the truth should come out. Just a thought. The silence on the other end was deafening. Then, she hung up. That evening, she came home with fire in her eyes. She slammed the door shut and threw her bag onto the couch. "What the hell, James? Are you insane? Do you know what you've done?" "Sure do," I said, not looking up from the TV. "I've done what you wouldn't. Held you accountable. You're ruining my career." "I'm ruining your career?" I laughed, finally turning to face her. "You've been sneaking around on company time, meeting Andrew Devlin at hotels. And I'm the one ruining your career? Get real, Emily." Her face flushed red. "You don't understand." "Oh, I understand perfectly." I cut her off. "You lied. You cheated. And now you're pissed that it's catching up to you." Boo-hoo. She opened her mouth to argue, but I wasn't finished. "And don't think this ends with your job." I called Andrew's wife. "She knows everything. So you might want to check in with your little boyfriend, see how he's holding up." The color drained from her face. "You didn't." "Oh, I did? And Rebecca? She's a firecracker. I wouldn't be surprised if Andrew's moving into a Motel 6 right about now." She collapsed onto the couch, her head in her hands. For the first time, I saw a genuine fear in her eyes. "James, please. We can fix this. It was a mistake." "A mistake?" I snapped, my voice rising. "Emily, a mistake is forgetting to take the chicken out of the freezer. This was a choice. Over and over. You chose to lie, to sneak around, to betray me. And now you want to fix it? No. We're done." Her sobs filled the room, but I felt nothing. Not pity, not regret, nothing. She was reaping what she'd sown, and I was done playing the fool. But I wasn't quite done yet. That night, while she slept on the couch, I finalized the divorce paperwork. I've been working on it for weeks, quietly gathering everything I needed to make sure I came out on top. I included a clause that ensured she got nothing from the house. It was in my name before we married, and outlined how I'd retain custody of everything I cared about. Emily would walk away with her clothes, her scarves, and whatever shred of dignity she had left. I called my lawyer the next morning to have the papers served at her office. I figured she'd appreciate the symmetry. When Emily got the papers, I wasn't there to see her reaction, but I heard about it. One of her coworkers, someone who'd been copied on the infamous email, messaged me later. "Dude, she lost it," screamed at her boss, threw her phone across the room, and stormed out. HR's already talking about letting her go. I thanked him and logged off, feeling a strange sense of satisfaction. Emily had built her betrayal on lies, and I dismantled it piece by piece. I wasn't proud of it, but I wasn't ashamed either. She'd played her game, and I'd beaten her at it. When Emily finally got home that evening, her face was a mess of anger, despair, and exhaustion. She didn't even slam the door this time. She just shuffled inside like someone who had lost the last bit of fight in them. It was oddly satisfying, watching her realize she wasn't in control anymore. She dropped her bag on the floor, not even bothering to look at me. "James, we need to talk." I muted the TV, leaning back on the couch. "Oh, now you want to talk? Go ahead. I'm all ears." She sat down across from me, her eyes red and puffy. For a moment, she didn't speak, just stared at the carpet like it might offer her an escape. Finally, she said, "You've made your point. I messed up. I betrayed you. But did you really have to destroy my entire life?" "Destroy your life?" I scoffed. "Emily, you did that all on your own. All I did was shine a light on it." Her lip quivered, and for a second I thought she might cry again. But instead, she straightened her back and looked me in the eye. "What do you want, James? Revenge? Fine. You've had it. But don't pretend you're some innocent victim. You've been distant for years. You work late. You're always glued to your laptop. You barely notice me anymore. I wasn't happy, and Save it," I snapped. "I wasn't happy either, but I didn't start sneaking around with Andrew Devlin. You had choices, Emily. You could have talked to me, you could have left, but instead, you lied. Don't try to pin this on me." She flinched, but I didn't stop. "And you know what the best part is? While you were off playing house with Andrew, I was working my ass off to give us a better life. I was planning our future, Emily, a future you apparently didn't care about." Her defenses crumbled then. She buried her face in her hands, her voice muffled as she sobbed. "I didn't mean for it to go this far. I just felt so alone." "Spare me the pity party," I said coldly. "You weren't alone. You were selfish." She looked up, her tear-streaked face full of desperation. "Can we fix this? Please, James. I'll do whatever it takes. Therapy, counseling, anything. Just don't give up on us." It was almost laughable, the audacity of her to ask for a second chance after everything she'd done. But there was no part of me that wanted reconciliation. The image of her with Andrew, the lies, the deception, it had shattered something inside me that could never be repaired. "I already gave up on us," I said, my voice flat. "The day I realized you were sneaking around. The papers are signed, Emily. It's over." Her eyes widened in shock. You filed for divorce?" "They'll be served tomorrow," I said, standing up. "You should start packing. And don't worry, I'll give you until the end of the week." Her jaw dropped, but she didn't say anything. I walked upstairs, leaving her sitting there in stunned silence. The next few days were quiet, tense. Emily stayed in the guest room, barely speaking to me except to ask for clarification on the divorce logistics. She didn't try to argue anymore, didn't try to fight. It was like she'd finally realized she had no cards left to play. Meanwhile, Andrew's life was imploding in spectacular fashion. Rebecca, his wife, had kicked him out the same day I called her. Apparently, she'd sent him a detailed breakdown of what she knew, complete with screenshots of my evidence. Rumor had it she was filing for divorce, too, and wasn't planning on going easy on him. I got an email from one of Emily's co-workers, letting me know that Andrew had been asked to resign after HR caught wind of his extracurricular activities. Emily surprisingly still had her job for now, but I doubted her reputation would recover. On Friday, I came home to find her bags packed and sitting by the door. She was waiting for me in the living room, looking hollowed out and defeated. "I'm leaving," she said quietly. "I'll stay with my sister until I figure out my next steps." I nodded, keeping my face neutral. "Good. Take care of yourself." She lingered for a moment, like she wanted to say something more. But in the end, she just picked up her bags and walked out without looking back. That night, as I sat alone in the house that used to feel like home, I felt an odd mix of emotions. Relief, satisfaction, even a flicker of sadness. But mostly I felt free. Emily had destroyed what we had, but I'd taken control of how the story ended. And for the first time in months, I felt like I could finally breathe. The days after Emily left were eerily quiet. It was the kind of silence that crawls into your bones and makes you question everything. I'd gotten my revenge, executed the plan with surgical precision, but as I sat there alone, I couldn't help but ask myself, was it enough? For a while, I busied myself with the practicalities, changing the locks, updating my will, dividing accounts. Every task gave me a small, temporary hit of satisfaction. But when the adrenaline wore off, all that was left was the hollow ache of betrayal. I thought about calling friends, but I didn't want their pity. I thought about seeing a therapist, but I couldn't bear the idea of explaining how my wife had turned me into a full-blown amateur private investigator. Instead, I spent hours scrolling through social media, half hoping to see a post about Emily, half hoping she'd vanished off the face of the earth. Then, one night something shifted. I was going through my emails, cleaning up old junk, when I stumbled across an unopened message from Rebecca, Andrew's soon-to-be ex-wife. The subject line simply read, "Thank you." Curiosity got the better of me. I clicked. James, I wanted to thank you for reaching out and sharing the truth. It's been difficult, but also liberating to know what kind of man I married. I've filed for divorce, and let's just say Andrew isn't taking it well. If you ever feel like talking to someone who gets it, or just need a drink, don't hesitate to reach out. Betrayal is a lonely thing, but it doesn't have to be. Best, Rebecca. I stared at the screen, rereading the message. The idea of talking to Rebecca was tempting, but it felt like crossing a line. Would it be for closure? Or would it be something messy, eh? After all, we were two people burned by the same fire. That kind of bond could be explosive. I typed and deleted half a dozen replies before finally settling on something neutral. Thank you for the kind words. Let's stay in touch. Rebecca replied almost instantly, suggesting we meet for coffee. I agreed, if only because I was tired of staring at my walls. We picked a small cafe downtown, one I'd never been to, as if meeting in neutral territory would make it less complicated. She was already there when I arrived, sitting at a table near the window. Rebecca was nothing like I'd imagined. Strong jawline, piercing eyes, and a presence that seemed to command the room without trying. She stood when she saw me, extending a hand. "James," she said with a tight smile. "Nice to meet the man who unraveled my husband." "Rebecca," I replied, shaking her hand. "Nice to meet the woman who finished the job." We spent hours talking not just about Emily and Andrew, but about everything. The ridiculous lies they told, the red flags we'd ignored, the absurdity of how it all fell apart. It was cathartic, like venting to someone who knew the script by heart. "I don't know whether to hate him or thank him," Rebecca admitted at one point, stirring her coffee absently. "I mean, this divorce is going to be hell, but at least I'm free of him." "I get that," I said, nodding. "Emily's out of the house now, and it's weird. Quiet. Too quiet, maybe." She looked at me thoughtfully. "What are you going to do next?" The question caught me off guard. "I don't know. Get back to normal, I guess. Whatever that is." Rebecca smirked. Normal is overrated. When we parted ways, she gave me a knowing look. "Don't let this define you, James. Take control of your story." Her words lingered with me long after I left. For weeks, they played in the back of my mind, pushing me to do something more. I'd taken control of my marriage's messy ending, but maybe it was time to take control of my own life. I started small, hit the gym again, reconnected with old friends, even took up a new hobby, photography. It wasn't groundbreaking, but it was something. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was moving forward. Emily's betrayal had left a scar, no doubt about it. But as the days turned into weeks, I realized that scars are just reminders of what we've survived. And I was surviving, thriving even, when Rebecca and I crossed paths again. Purely by chance at a mutual friend's gathering. It didn't feel awkward. It felt inevitable. She raised her glass to me, a sly smile playing on her lips. "To new beginnings," she said. "To new beginnings," I echoed, feeling a spark I hadn't felt in years. The encounter with Rebecca stuck with me. It wasn't just the way she looked at me, or the way I caught myself looking at her. It was something deeper, like she was daring me to see myself differently. Not as a man burned by betrayal, but as someone capable of rising from it. I'd always thought of revenge as the final act, the period at the end of a sentence. But meeting Rebecca made me wonder, what if it was just the beginning of a new chapter? For a while, I kept my distance, not wanting to complicate things further. But Rebecca wasn't the type to let things fizzle out. A week after our accidental meeting, she texted me, "Let's grab drinks. I owe you one for the circus you unleashed." I stared at my phone, debating whether this was a good idea. Logic said no. Curiosity said yes. Curiosity won. We met at a small whiskey bar, the kind of place with dim lighting and an air of quiet sophistication. Rebecca was already there when I arrived, nursing a glass of something neat. She looked up and smiled as I slid into the seat across from her. "James," she said, raising her glass. "The man of the hour." "Rebecca," I replied, mirroring her gesture. "The woman who handled it all with unnerving grace." She laughed, a genuine sound that made the tension in my chest loosen. "You give me too much credit. There were a lot of ugly crying nights you didn't see." "Still," I said, taking a sip of my drink, "you handled it better than I did. I went full scorched earth." "And I'm grateful for it," she said, her expression softening. "Honestly, James, if you hadn't called me, I'd still be living in the dark, clinging to the idea that Andrew was just Andrew. And now, she said, leaning back, I know the truth. And as much as it hurts, it's freeing. Painful, but freeing." I nodded, understanding all too well. "So, what's next for you?" She smirked. "That's the question, isn't it? I've been thinking about it a lot. Maybe move somewhere new. Start fresh. Toronto, maybe. Or Paris." "Paris?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Why not?" she said, her eyes sparkling. "If I'm going to rebuild, I might as well do it with a view of the Eiffel Tower." I chuckled, shaking my head. "You don't do anything halfway, do you?" "Not anymore," she said, her voice steady. "Life's too short to hold back." As the night wore on, the conversation shifted, moving from heavy topics to lighter ones. We talked about everything: movies, books, even embarrassing childhood memories. It felt easy, natural, like we'd known each other for years instead of weeks. At one point, she asked me, "What about you? What's next for James, the scorched earth specialist?" I hesitated, caught off guard. "Honestly, I don't know. I've been so focused on tearing down what was, I haven't thought about building something new. Maybe it's time to start," she said, her gaze unwavering. The weight of her words hung in the air, and for the first time, I realized she was right. I'd been so consumed by anger, by the need to expose Emily's betrayal, that I hadn't stopped to think about what came after. But now, sitting across from Rebecca, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. When we left the bar, the city was quiet, the streets bathed in the soft glow of streetlights. Rebecca walked beside me, her steps light and confident. As we reached her car, she turned to me, her expression unreadable. "James," she said, her voice low. "Thank you." "For what?" I asked. "For being exactly who I needed you to be," she said, stepping closer. "And for reminding me that even in the mess, there's something worth finding." Before I could respond, she kissed me. Not a fiery, impulsive kiss, but something softer, gentler, like an unspoken promise. When she pulled back, her eyes searched mine, as if waiting for me to say something. I didn't. Instead, I kissed her back. That night, for the first time in months, I didn't think about Emily or Andrew or the chaos they'd caused. I didn't think about betrayal or revenge or what could have been. All I thought about was Rebecca and the spark that had ignited between us. The kiss with Rebecca had been unexpected, but it wasn't unwelcome. It stayed with me, lingering like the taste of whiskey on my lips long after she'd driven away. I sat in my car for a while, staring at the empty street, trying to make sense of the storm swirling in my chest. This wasn't supposed to happen. I'd burned my marriage to the ground, sure, but I hadn't planned on stumbling into something new amidst the ashes. And yet, there was a spark, faint but undeniable, daring me to fan into something bigger. The next day, Rebecca texted me, "Thanks for last night. Let's do it again soon." I stared at the message, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. A part of me wanted to dive in, to see where this thing between us could go. But another part, the cautious, wounded part, held me back. I'd just come out of a marriage riddled with lies and betrayal. Did I really want to risk getting hurt again? In the end, I went with honesty. I had a great time too. But are we moving too fast? Her response came quickly. Maybe. But who says fast is bad? Damn her and her logic. We did meet again, this time for dinner at a small Italian restaurant she recommended. The place was cozy, with candlelit tables and an old-school charm that made it feel like a scene from a movie. Rebecca was already there when I arrived, sipping a glass of red wine and looking effortlessly elegant. "James," she said, her face lighting up when she saw me. "Glad you came." I wasn't about to turn down Italian, I said, sliding into the seat across from her. "Though I'm starting to think you have a thing for dimly lit venues." She smirked, guilty as charged. The conversation flowed easily, just like it had at the bar. We talked about everything: work, travel, even the absurdity of online dating. At one point, I confessed, "I've been out of the game so long, I wouldn't even know where to start." "Good thing you don't have to," she said, giving me a pointed look that sent a jolt through me. By the time dessert arrived, a tiramisu we decided to share, it felt like we'd known each other forever. And yet, there was still a charge between us, an unspoken question hanging in the air. What happens next? Rebecca was the one to address it. "So, James," she said, her tone light but her gaze steady. "Are you ready to move on? Or are you still holding on to the past?" The question hit me like a punch to the gut. For weeks, I'd been so focused on revenge, on exposing Emily's lies, that I hadn't stopped to think about what I was holding on to. But sitting across from Rebecca, I realized something. I didn't feel angry anymore. I didn't feel bitter. I just felt ready. "I think," I said slowly, "I'm done looking back." She smiled, her eyes softening. "Good, because I don't want to be your rebound, James. I want to be something real." We left the restaurant hand in hand, the city buzzing quietly around us. When we reached her car, she turned to me, her expression open and vulnerable. "So, what now?" she asked. I hesitated for a moment, then pulled her close. "Now," I said, "we see where this goes." And with that, I kissed her, not as a man seeking revenge or closure, but as someone ready to start fresh. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of new beginnings. Rebecca and I fell into an easy rhythm, one that felt natural despite the chaos we'd both come from. We went on hikes, cooked dinners together, and spent hours talking about everything and nothing. It wasn't perfect, nothing ever is, but it was real. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was building something worth holding on to. Emily, meanwhile, was barely a blip on my radar. The divorce proceedings were moving along smoothly, and apart from a few half-hearted attempts to reconcile, she seemed to accept that our marriage was over. Andrew had faded into obscurity, his career in shambles and his marriage in ruins. I didn't care enough to keep tabs on him. Rebecca and I didn't talk much about our exes. We'd both had our share of pain, but neither of us wanted to dwell on it. Instead, we focused on the future, on what we could build together. One evening, as we sat on our balcony watching the sunset, Rebecca turned to me and said, "You know, I think the best revenge isn't destroying someone's life. It's building a better one for yourself." I smiled, leaning in to kiss her. "Then I guess we're winning." Life with Rebecca felt like a clean slate. It wasn't perfect, nothing ever is, but it was the kind of raw, unpolished happiness I hadn't known in years. We spent our evenings cooking, trading stories about our childhoods, and laughing at the absurdity of how we'd met. For the first time in months, I felt like I could finally breathe. But echoes of the past have a way of creeping in when you least expect them. It started with an email, one of those corporate newsletters that ends up in your spam folder. The subject line read, "Andrew Devlin, New Horizons Consulting's featured speaker." My chest tightened. It had been months since I'd thought about Andrew. The last I'd heard, his life was in shambles. Rebecca had filed for divorce. He'd resigned in disgrace, and his professional reputation was in tatters. Yet here he was clawing his way back, spinning his narrative into something palatable for the world. The blurb under his photo, smug as ever, read, "Andrew Devlin shares his journey of resilience and rebuilding after adversity." "Adversity?" I muttered, shaking my head. "You mean getting caught?" Rebecca noticed my change in mood. She walked over, her brow furrowed. "What's up?" I turned the laptop toward her. "Look who's rebranding himself as a motivational speaker." Her lips tightened as she read the email. Unbelievable. He really can't help himself? Can he? "It's almost impressive," I said. The guy could probably sell ice to a polar bear. Rebecca hesitated, her expression darkening. Do you think he'll mention us? The circumstances? I shook my head. He's too proud for that. He'll spin it as some vague professional setback. No way he admits what actually happened. Still, the thought nagged at me. Andrew's audacity was a reminder of how easily people like him moved on, brushing aside the damage they left in their wake. A few days later, Emily resurfaced. She sent me a text out of the blue. Can we talk? Just once. I owe you an explanation. I stared at the screen, debating whether to respond. Part of me wanted to ignore her, to leave her message unread and let her sit with the silence. But another part, a quieter, more curious part, wondered what she could possibly have to say. Against my better judgment, I replied, What's there to explain? Her answer came quickly. Not an excuse. Just closure. For both of us. I agreed to meet her at a coffee shop near her office. Rebecca didn't say much when I told her, but I could see the concern in her eyes. Just be careful, she said. She might still know how to push your buttons. Emily looked different when I saw her. Tired. Worn down. The confident, radiant woman I'd once married was gone, replaced by someone who seemed smaller, more fragile. Thanks for coming, she said, stirring her coffee. I wasn't sure you would. I wasn't sure I should, I admitted. So, what's this about? She took a deep breath, avoiding my gaze. I've been doing a lot of thinking about what happened, about why I did what I did. And, I said, keeping my voice even, and I realized I was chasing something that wasn't real, she said, her voice trembling. Andrew made me feel seen, but it was all an illusion. He didn't care about me. Not really. I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. And you're telling me this because? I don't know, she said, her eyes finally meeting mine. Maybe because I hate the way we ended things. Because I can't stand the thought of you hating me forever. I sighed, my anger cooling into something closer to pity. Emily, I don't hate you, but I can't forget what you did. You broke something in me, something I can't fix. And honestly, I don't think I want to. Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. I'm sorry, James. I really am. I believe you, I said. But it doesn't change anything. When I left the coffee shop, I felt lighter somehow. Emily's apology hadn't healed the wound, but it had closed it. She wasn't the woman I'd once loved, and I wasn't the man who'd married her. We'd both become something else, strangers with shared history. That night, Rebecca and I sat on her balcony, sipping wine as the city lights flickered in the distance. I told her about the meeting with Emily, every detail. And how do you feel now? She asked, her voice gentle. Free, I said, smiling at her. For the first time, I feel free. She reached for my hand, lacing her fingers through mine. Then here's to freedom, and to not letting the past define us. We raised our glasses, and for the first time in months, I felt like the future was mine to shape. Closure is a strange thing. You think it'll feel monumental, like slamming a door shut with finality. But for me, it was more like the soft click of a latch, barely noticeable, yet unmistakable. My meeting with Emily hadn't resolved everything, but it had given me the peace I didn't realize I needed. Rebecca noticed the difference immediately. You're smiling more, she teased one evening as we cooked dinner together. It's almost suspicious. Don't get used to it, I shot back, grinning. It's probably a phase. But we both knew it wasn't. I was finally shedding the weight of the past, and Rebecca was a big part of that. She grounded me, reminded me that life wasn't just a series of betrayals and revenge plots. It was messy, yes, but it was also beautiful in its chaos. Then, just as things seemed to settle, Andrew Devlin re-entered the picture. It happened through a friend of Rebecca's, someone who worked in PR and had caught wind of Andrew's resilience tour. Apparently, he was booking speaking engagements and interviews, spinning his downfall into a redemption arc. The cherry on top? He was publishing a book titled The Phoenix Effect: How to Rise from the Ashes of Adversity. When Rebecca told me, I laughed so hard I nearly spilled my coffee. The guy's got some nerve, I said, shaking my head. Ashes of adversity? He created the fire. Rebecca wasn't laughing. It's more than nerve, James. It's a slap in the face. He's using us, our pain, as part of his stupid narrative. That stopped me cold. You think he's going to mention us? I don't know, she admitted. But even if he doesn't, the whole thing feels wrong. Rebecca's frustration lit a spark in me. I'd been content to let Andrew fade into obscurity, but the thought of him profiting off the destruction he'd caused was too much to ignore. If he wanted to sell his lies to the world, I'd make sure the truth came out first. The first step was to gather evidence. I combed through everything I'd collected during the fallout of Emily's affair, texts, photos, GPS logs, and compiled it into a neat little dossier. Rebecca did the same, digging up emails and screenshots from her own archives. Between the two of us, we had a damning case. The second step was to find the right outlet. Rebecca's PR friend pointed us toward a journalist who specialized in exposing frauds and hypocrites. The kind of writer who thrived on taking down pompous figures like Andrew. We reached out cautiously at first, but as soon as the journalists saw the evidence, they were all in. This guy's been playing the victim card while stomping on everyone around him, they said during our first call. I'll make sure people see him for who he really is. The article dropped a week later, and it was brutal. The headline alone was enough to make my day. The Phoenix Effect or the Fraud Effect. The real story behind Andrew Devlin's rise and fall. It didn't hold back. The journalist laid out Andrew's history of affairs, his professional misconduct, and the trail of devastation he'd left in his wake. They quoted Rebecca and me, anonymously, of course, and included screenshots of his messages and photos of his clandestine hotel meetups. The reaction was swift. Social media lit up with outrage, mocking Andrew's resilience, narrative, and calling out his hypocrisy. His book deal was canceled within days, and several of his scheduled speaking engagements dropped him from their lineups. Rebecca and I celebrated with champagne that night. To justice, she said, raising her glass. To karma, I replied, clinking mine against hers. In the weeks that followed, life returned to its new normal. Andrew was finally out of the picture, his carefully constructed image in ruins. Emily faded into the background, her attempts to reach out dwindling until they stopped altogether. And Rebecca and I continued to grow closer, finding comfort and joy in each other's company. One evening, as we sat on her balcony watching the sunset, she turned to me with a thoughtful expression. Do you ever think about what life would have been like if none of this had happened? Sometimes, I admitted, but I don't dwell on it. If this hadn't happened, I wouldn't have met you. She smiled, leaning her head against my shoulder. It's funny how life works, isn't it? All that pain, and somehow, it brought us here. Here's not so bad, I said, wrapping an arm around her. No, she agreed softly. Here's pretty damn good. Months passed, and the echoes of betrayal began to fade into distant memories. The chaos, the anger, the revenge, it all felt like a lifetime ago. Rebecca and I had built something solid, something real, and for the first time in years, I felt at peace. Life didn't magically become perfect, of course. There were still bumps in the road, difficult conversations, moments of doubt, but we faced them together. The wounds from our past didn't disappear, but they became scars, reminders of what we'd overcome. One Saturday morning, Rebecca and I decided to take a drive out to the countryside. She mentioned a little vineyard she used to visit with friends, and it sounded like the perfect escape. The air was crisp, the sun warm, and the rows of grapevines stretched endlessly across the rolling hills. As we sipped wine on the patio, Rebecca turned to me with a curious smile. Do you ever think about reaching out to Emily? The question caught me off guard. No, I said, shaking my head. Why would I? Not to reconcile, she said quickly, but maybe just to close the book for good. I considered it for a moment. I think I already have. Meeting her that day gave me all the closure I needed. She's not a chapter one need to revisit. Rebecca nodded, her expression thoughtful. That's good. Healthy, even. And Andrew? I asked, raising an eyebrow. Do you ever think about him? She laughed, a short, bitter sound. Not anymore. He's just noise in the background. Good, I said, clinking my glass against hers. To quiet futures. To quiet futures, she echoed, her eyes warm. The vineyard trip marked a turning point for me. For so long, I've been focused on what I'd lost, my marriage, my trust, the life I thought I'd built with Emily. But now I could finally see what I'd gained. A fresh start. A partner who didn't just support me, but understood me on a level I hadn't thought possible. And most importantly, a renewed sense of who I was. Rebecca and I didn't rush things. We took our time, letting our relationship grow naturally. But as the months turned into a year, it became clear that this wasn't just a rebound or a temporary connection. This was something worth fighting for. One evening, as we walked along the waterfront, watching the lights of the city dance on the waves, I slipped my hand into my pocket. The small velvet box felt heavy, its weight both thrilling and terrifying. I'd spent weeks agonizing over this moment, wondering if it was too soon, if I was ready, if we were ready. But when I looked at Rebecca, laughing at some ridiculous joke I'd made, I knew. "Rebecca," I said, my voice steady despite the knot in my stomach. She turned to me, her smile fading slightly as she caught the seriousness in my tone. "What's up?" I took a deep breath, pulling the box from my pocket and dropping to one knee. Her eyes widened, her hand flying to her mouth. "I've been through hell this past year," I said, my voice trembling. "And I know you have too. But you've shown me that it's possible to come out the other side stronger, better, and ready to build something real. I don't want to waste another second wondering what could be. Rebecca, will you marry me?" Tears filled her eyes as she nodded, her voice breaking. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." That night, as we celebrated our engagement over champagne and laughter, I realized how far I'd come. The man who'd once been consumed by betrayal and revenge was gone, replaced by someone who'd learned to let go, to heal, and to love again. Emily and Andrew were nothing more than footnotes in a story that was no longer about them. This was my story now, and it was only just beginning. Years later, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened. Life with Rebecca was good, better than I'd ever imagined. We'd traveled, built a home together, and even started a small business. The scars from our past were still there, but they no longer defined us. One day, while cleaning out an old box of files, I came across a photograph of Emily and me from our wedding day. For a moment, I stared at it, my chest tightening, not from pain but from gratitude. She'd broken me, yes, but she'd also set me free. With a small smile, I tucked the photo back into the box and closed the lid. It was time to move forward. Forever.